How you doing, Henner?
What's up, Luke?
Where are you? Are you at the Gracie Academy?
I'm here at Gracie University headquarters, yeah, Southern California.
Boy, you want to talk about a rock solid Skype connection. Look at that HD. Amazing. Thank you so much for that. All right, man, let's get to this. First of all, are you you're going to be cornering Brian, I'm assuming on Saturday, right?
That's correct, yes.
When do you head out there?
We head out Tuesday. Standard procedure, show up Tuesday, workouts Wednesday, cut the weight, maybe press conference Thursday, weigh in Friday, fight Saturday, fly home Sunday, and celebrate.
Certainly. All right, let's talk about this moment for Brian. You, as his trainer, seems like his friend and mentor. Before I ask what it means for Brian, what does it actually mean for you to see one of your students ascend to heights like this?
Well, it's not just one of your students, and everyone's asking me, how excited we are for the belt and what a big deal this is this weekend. And I smile and I nod and I go, yeah, it's exciting, But the reality is, and this is true for anyone who's known Brian since he was a kid. And for me, it was when he was 12, 13 years old when he first came in for class after having gotten beat up in a street fight and then signed up just to learn how to defend himself. Anyone who knows Brian from that era knows that Brian already won the title, have made it out of the challenges that he faced and the difficult circumstances for him and his family that he faced early on, and really the life that he lived, which was not by any means a positive one, by conventional standards. For Brian to have made it out of what he was involved with, and to now be competing as a professional athlete on the level that he's competing at, he already won. So for me, I look at this and I go, oh man, this is all extra, because there were many times throughout his earlier years where we didn't know if Brian was going to make it out. There were times where I wouldn't see him for 3 months at a time because of challenges and not drugs, but gangs and other things that he was involved with. No drugs, to be clear, but gangs and other things that he was involved with back then, and it was just such a negative lifestyle that I wouldn't hear about him for 3 months, and he would show up and he would say, "Man, I lost one of my best friends who just got shot." And I'm like thinking, all I can think is, man, it's your best friend right now. At some point, it could be you. And it was a very, interesting balance of being there for him as a teacher and as someone who could listen to him and he can help him reflect and try to make the right choices. So for me, listen, we're already celebrating. This is already being here is already a victory in itself. And yes, winning the UFC featherweight championship would be phenomenal. Really for Brian, right? I'm just so excited for him, knowing what he came from, that this would be something so meaningful for him and his family.
Given the background and given his sterling ability to just blow through the division in the way that he did, had some tough moments, but certainly he came out on top, right? How unique of a student is Brian Ortega?
Well, so listen, Brian, what made him most unique, it was never his athleticism. It was never his power or his speed. It was Brian's ability to absorb information and then implement, at a faster rate than really anyone else. And this started very early on, and we noticed it from the very beginning. Even as a kid, he was doing adult classes, but he was only 13 years old, training with grown men. And we would show him a technique, and he would nail it. And within his first year, Brian was the kid that if you showed up, let's just say to Gracie Academy back then, and you wanted to try a class, and you're a big guy, and you show up and say, "Yeah, I'm not sure if this stuff works." I'd be like, "Okay, go roll with the little blue-eyed skinny kid over there." And Brian would choke you out in just a few minutes, and then you would sign up. So he was like our undercover enforcer back then, and that's where I gave him the nickname Triangle or T City. Triangle City was the original name, and then it got too long to say, too much of a mouthful, and I just started calling him T City because he would just triangle choke everyone. They would grab him, they would manhandle them until they were tapping out. And that just became the case. And it started with triangles, and now it's evolved to so many other skill sets that we've developed over the years, and he's utilized so effectively there in the UFC. But it's an implementation speed that is unique. And I've seen it with other top talent that I've worked with, but Brian really does stand alone in his ability to learn something and then apply it in the chaos, right? And that's why, for so many other fighters, when they get deep into that, second, third, and now fourth and fifth round, the championship rounds, Brian hasn't been tested there too much, but when they get deeper into the fight, things start to get, more predictably sluggish and ineffective. Where with Brian, he's just as dangerous in the third round as he is in the first round. And we know based on his, unique records of, consecutive third round finishes that he holds, there's no surprise to me that that's a record that he holds because of the fact that he thrives in the chaos. He thrives in the less than favorable circumstances.
How would you describe his jiu-jitsu to somebody who just didn't have just didn't know exactly what they were looking at? You know, it's amazing. I was saying this to, we had Max on earlier in the show. I went back and I watched all of Brian's fights in the UFC. I try to explain to people, usually a submission, sometimes you can snatch it, but you usually have to like build towards it. You have to take steps to get there. And it's not that he doesn't, but when he finds a head or he finds an arm, he just locks into the groove immediately. It's very rare you can find someone like that. As his predominant trainer in this regard, how would you describe, it's a broad question, how would you describe his jiu-jitsu?
Man, it's tough, but one way to think about it is if you put, two jiu-jitsu practitioners inside of like a large barrel and you close it at the top of a hill and then you rolled that barrel down the hill, by the time the barrel got to the bottom of the hill, Brian would have the other person in a chokehold. So Brian has a unique ability where jiu-jitsu is, even though jiu-jitsu is seemingly to the spectator a very unpredictable sport where they're just wrestling and flying all over the place, it actually is very systematic. And what Brian has done well is he's taken a non-systematic approach to the systematic art of jiu-jitsu. And in that sense, he's setting techniques up and he's catching submissions and creating opportunities out of less conventional positions, holds, grips, and that creativity, that freedom to express, that's very artistic in a way, is what's unique about Brian, is that he doesn't set up a triangle choke in the way that everyone else sets up a triangle choke, and he's not setting up a darce or a guillotine choke in the way that everyone else is setting it up. And many of these unique setups we talk about, right, in the gym here, and we go over them and we practice them and we kind of prepare for them. But many of them we don't talk about. Many of them he wasn't taught these. And many of them he didn't do it for the first time until the actual fight happens. And that's what's unique, is Brian is not limited by any form or structure. He's the most fluid person when it comes to applying these techniques in a dynamic, ever-changing fight against the opponent. So that's what I would say is creativity with setups. He's not following the conventional patterns, and that's what makes him so hard to train for.
You know what I also like about Brian is he's got swag. He's a young guy, good-looking kid. He's got confidence about him. But in an age, and you know this, Rener, even in the jiu-jitsu world, it's like, oh my God, it's just everyone's trolling everybody else. And there's these ridiculous things that happen on social media. He sort of stays above the fray, doesn't he? So he's the cool guy, but without having to resort to, he doesn't get too far away from being a martial artist while being a fighter. And I think in a day and age like this, that's rare, and it's a welcome refresher.
Yeah, and I think I think you just nailed it on the head there at the end. MMA has created something very interesting, right? Where the elements that make up MMA are martial arts. But now, after 25 years, MMA, the acronym, is a sport of its own, is an entity of its own. So it's also a spectator sport of its own. And there are many people today who are coming up in MMA without the values, the integrity, the respect, and the discipline that martial arts provides. And no one's perfect, right? Even the most martial artists of martial arts in MMA are not perfect people. But you can tell when there is a thread and there is an element to their training and their upbringing in the arts that is actually the martial arts, right? The traditions and the values of martial arts that were so common before mixed martial arts, when everyone practiced their individual karate, taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, kung fu, and they were all segmented. But now that it's been 25 years of a kind of a combined entity, there are people who are only a product of that entity and are just learning from their 25-year-old kids today who were not even born when the UFC started, let's just say. And now they're a product of that mentality where it's about money, it's about fighting, it's about violence, it's about entertainment, where martial artists, it's not about any of that. It's about self-defense, discipline, and ultimately, even empathy to a certain extent, right? Like one of the greatest elements of jiu-jitsu is the ability to neutralize violence without violence. So we teach that to our students, and Brian learned that his whole life. So what you're seeing now is someone who has the spotlight, but still has those martial arts values before MMA, the sport, even though he's applying it in the context of the sport, which is beautiful to see. And you see it with many others. And one that immediately jumps out is a guy like Lyoto Machida, who's the most consummate martial artist and most respectful person in the cage, yet he's competing in a sport of MMA. And the question is, why is that? Because he, like the Gracie family, is a multi-generational family of martial artists with those traditions and values. And I think that's, today, unfortunately, it's kind of like the minority. If you would, right? It's kind of these martial artists have become the minority in a sport of MMA, which, for better or worse, has somewhat, stripped some of those values away. And it's understandable, although it's unfortunate. And the other unintended and concerning byproduct of that is now you have civilians who are not professional competitors who are learning the sport of MMA but aren't getting those values, and they're basically being taught these weapons of mass destruction, right? Chokes and arm bars and striking techniques and all the elements of MMA, but they're not being taught the values of martial arts, and as a result, they become liabilities to society. You see what I'm saying? Someone who learns martial arts and the respect that comes with it is not going to use it for the wrong reasons. But someone who learns the elements of MMA and does not have the respect or the integrity could very well use it for the wrong reasons. And we can contemplate what many of those reasons would be. We don't even need to. They can commit crimes with these very skills, as I've seen happen. And now with a very video recording society, we've seen videos of it, right? So that's a big concern, but that's a topic for a different day, I suppose.
Let's get back to Brian here for just a second. Max is a tough fight for anybody, and you guys know that better than I do. You made a point about Brian having this ability to apply critical thinking skills in these really terrible, very difficult moments. What makes, to me, in my mind, this fight so interesting is who's going to make the fight their kind of fight. Because as you know, Rener, Max is when he wants to be, because sometimes he'll just throw down, right? But when he wants to be, he can really sit behind the jab and move very carefully and mind the distance and shut down the takedown. That seems to be the biggest threat, right? If your guy thrives in chaos, the other guy can create a system where there is no chaos.
Yeah. So, this is everyone's question, right? And listen, we have nothing but respect, back to the martial values in this situation, the highest level of respect for Max and what he's accomplished and his talents as a fighter. I know Max's coach, Rylan Lazares and Gracie Techniques there in Hawaii, really good friend, amazing jiu-jitsu practitioner under Pedro Sauer there. So it's very much like all in the family for this one. And Max, is an incredible striker. And yes, when he wants to, he can be very elusive, very hard to get a hold of. But I told Brian, I said, Brian, listen, what has happened is you have, you've essentially done something very unique where initially he was simply a threat of submission, 100% submission concern and a threat there for initially it was very much of a submission threat to the division. But what has happened is he came in, he knocked out Frankie Edgar, right? And when he did that, all of a sudden the whole division is on notice now. And the question is, what do you watch out for? Right. And I said, Brian, this is beautiful because it shows what amazing development you've had in your striking game with Coach James there and the rest of his team. So he's done something very beautiful where, someone who's never been finished gets knocked out on their feet in the first round. And you have, arguably the tightest jiu-jitsu submission in MMA right now. So it creates a situation where he's threatening in both categories. And it really boils down to, what kind of fight they want to make it. What's my favorite part about the whole fight, because there's so much to not be predictable about this, is that we have 5 rounds, and I think that's very interesting. And in my opinion, knowing what I know about Brian, 5 rounds is an advantage because, like I said, we've seen it in his 3-round fights for so many years, whereas the fight went on, he became more dangerous towards the end. And I suspect the same will be true as we creep into those championship rounds.
It's amazing to me is if he gets, I have the highest level of respect for Max Holloway. If Brian beats him, where do you think Brian would rank pound for pound? Because I honestly believe if you finish Frankie Edgar and you defeat or finish Max Holloway, holy crap, man, you are doing something very, very different than the rest of your contemporaries. Where would that put him?
Listen, it put him towards the top. But, a lot of people outside like to speculate about that, but Brian's not speculating about that, nor are we as his closest, coaches and friends. It really is one fight at a time, and we have such a major feat here in Max Holloway. And I'm as excited as everyone else to just see that these 2 artists go in there and do what they do best. But I know that if he seals this deal, I think it'll skyrocket him, toward near the top of that list.
Now, before we say goodbye, and we really appreciate your time, I want to make sure we have to get this in. You have launched, you and I believe Huron together, if I'm not mistaken, have launched a GoFundMe. It's called Justice for Jamal. I'm going to tweet it out from my account. Hopefully we can get MMA Fighting to retweet it. So let me see if I can understand this. There's a Syrian refugee who lives in the UK who was bullied. Why are you raising money for him?
Yeah. So we've done this in the past where kids who are really horrifically bullied in wherever they live, and we become aware of it because oftentimes it's caught on video. People let us know, we find out about it, and then we sponsor them to come to California to basically be bully proofed, right? Because that's what we do as a business every single day is we empower people to take a stand and defend themselves. And we've done this successfully for other kids in the past, and this kid's in the UK. And every time I've done it for other kids in the past, um, you know, after we do it, and we should put a video on the internet of the transformation and the before and after. It's remarkable. Literally 1 week of training here at Gracie University, and everything changes for this child and their ability to assert themselves. And in many cases, they're never bullied again. In a recent case, Austin McDaniel, 5 years later, he became a Marine after graduating high school, after getting beat up on this video. We called him in, we changed it, went to the Marines, and now he's just a monster, strong guy, handsome, athletic, and just everything changed because something changed. And we see this kid, Jamal, who got really, really badly bullied, him and his sister in the UK at their school. They're Syrian refugees living there. And we thought, wow, so many times people have asked us, how can they help us make these transformations more possible, more frequently? And we saw this one and said, man, we can absolutely help him. And he's dropped out of school. So everything is going down for this family right now. So we launched a GoFundMe campaign to raise the funds that would allow Jamal, his sister, and his family to come to California, spend at least 1 week with us training here to really get him off to the right start and bully-proof him, build that confidence, give him the tools to defend himself on the highest level, and then send him back and then sponsor his continued training in the UK. So the reality is anyone who does jiu-jitsu knows that's all this kid needs is, some attention, some good instruction, and some motivation, and really the belief that he's worth defending. And we can provide that, with a week here in California. So we're going to make it happen. And if you could, put out the link and people can donate there, and any surplus funds, we're not charging for our time at all. We're going to fly them out. We're going to teach them for free. And these are all to cover travel expenses and training when they return back to the UK, so they can keep this skill alive. And, it is a perishable skill. So we want to keep them going once we get them back to where they live.
Yeah, I just tweeted it out. We'll definitely make sure we get the word out about that. By the way, as a former Marine myself, I have to say thank you very much for doing that. You could change lives with martial arts. Before you go, Rener, let me just ask you about this. There's a point I'll make, and then I'll ask a question about it. I have to tell you, I'm not worried about the future of MMA, but I am worried that the kinds of really elite black belts that used to make their way over, like a Brian Ortega, but certainly I'm thinking more of like a Demian Maia, a Fabricio Verdum, these kinds of guys. A lot of them are just going to stay in jiu-jitsu now. They can make money that way, which is a good thing, right? You kind of want that to a degree. But I do wonder, like, what's going to happen to jiu-jitsu and MMA without them. However, I have to tell you, the UFC signing, Kron Gracie, wow. You want to talk about good news. For folks who are not familiar with him, I know they just know him as Hickson's son. Even in MMA, his jiu-jitsu is almost without parallel. Can you just tell the audience what they're in store for with this kid, please?
Yeah. So my cousin Kron just got signed to the UFC. It's very exciting. People who don't know, just get ready for every touch, every contact that is made to be a deadly one for his opponent. That's how dangerous it is. And I think that, I think people see some of that with Brian, right? They feel that if he gets a hold of you, the fight's over, as Joe Rogan has said so enthusiastically. And that will continue to be the case when Kron makes his way over to the UFC. He's incredibly talented. He's been working a lot on his distance and his standing game. So, he's done incredibly well in Japan against some really tough opponents. So it's the perfect time to bring him over. I'm excited to see as much as anybody else. But yeah, in terms of, there is a difference. You're right. There is a difference in the jiu-jitsu. There are lots of black belts, and then there are, there is the next tier above that. And Kron absolutely, it falls under that category. So the world can be very excited to see someone who goes in there with a very specific plan, known to him, known to his opponents, but still unstoppable. And those are sometimes the most beautiful ones to watch.
Don't forget to donate to Justice for Jamal. They're almost there. They just need a little bit more of a donation, and they will reach their goal. It's for a phenomenal cause. Rener, it's a real thrill for me to get to talk to you. I could talk to you about jiu-jitsu theory and all this kind of stuff that's happening for a million years, but I know you're a busy man with a lot to do. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for making time for me. Everyone go donate to Justice for Jamal, and best of luck. Cannot wait to see you corner. I cannot wait to see Brian Ortega in action.
Thank you very much. Everyone out there, follow me, Rener Gracie, on Instagram, Twitter, and GracieUniversity.com. For anyone out there who's kind of couch surfing but not really getting down with jiu-jitsu, we got you covered.